Lab 2 covers the first week of histology. And coming up, Lab 3 will cover the rest of histology plus the integumentary system, which is the skin and its organs. So histology is the study of tissues. And the definition of a tissue is 2 or more cell types with a common function. So 2 or more cell types with a common function. Not 2 or more cells, but 2 or more types of cells. So some examples of tissue: the outer layer of your skin, the epidermis, that is a tissue. Blood is considered a tissue because it has 2 or more cell types. Red blood cells plus 5 different types of white blood cells. And they all have a common function, basically getting oxygen around the body and fighting off infection. Cartilage is a tissue, and so is bone. Now, tissues are made up of cells, which make up the living portion, and everything else is called the matrix, and that is non-living. The matrix is composed of fibers. We will see this more in our second type of tissue rather than the first type of tissue, but fibers like collagen, elastic or elastin, and then we have reticular fibers. Those are the 3 main fiber types. And then the ground substance. This varies quite a bit between tissues. So in a lot of tissues, it's just referred to as tissue fluid. And for a lot of the tissues, it is fluid. But think about cartilage. The ground substance in cartilage is more like a gel. And think about bone. The ground substance in bone is solid. It's calcium. So the matrix is the non-living part. We have ground substance like tissue fluid, or solid calcium, or gel, or plasma in blood. And then the connective tissues especially have fibers in them. Not so much the epithelial tissues. And those are the 2 that we're going to cover today: epithelial and connective. So we have epithelial tissues for today, connective tissues for today, nervous tissues for week 2, which will be lab 3, muscle tissues for week 2, which will be lab 3. And then we're going to throw in the integumentary system. This is our first organ system. When you put multiple types of tissues together, you get an organ. Now, the organ of the integumentary system is the skin, which fits the definition of an organ: 2 or more types of tissue with a common function. So our tissue types, well, we have the epidermis on the outside, which is epithelial tissue, and then we have the dermis underneath, which is connective tissue. We also have adipose tissue underneath that. That's part of the integumentary system, though it's not technically part of what is called skin. And we have hair and nails and glands and things like that. Starting with epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissue characteristics: they're going to be tightly packed cells with little matrix to see under the microscope. So you're mainly going to see the cells that are squished together. Epithelial tissue is avascular, and A means not. Vascular refers to blood vessels. So epithelial tissues are avascular, no blood vessels running through them. If you right now just scratch your skin with your fingernail, it's not going to bleed. You're losing cells, but you're not going to bleed because this epidermis is an epithelial tissue. It doesn't have blood vessels in it. Now, if you scratch yourself deeper, you will hit the connective tissue underneath, which is the dermis, and that is very vascular. So, but a light scratch, it's not going to bleed because there's no blood vessels running through it. So typically what we see are epithelial tissues sitting on top of connective tissue. Epithelial tissue covers and lines and makes up glands. By glands, we mean things like sweat glands, or mammary glands, or salivary glands, or glands like the thyroid. So it makes up glands. We're going to primarily focus on its function of covering and lining. So it covers organs. It's part of the membranes that we talked about during the first week. And it lines, for example, lines the inside of an organ, like your stomach. Now, epithelial tissues are anchored to a basement membrane. This is a non-living glue-like substance. And then what you do is you build cells on top of it. And because these epithelial tissues cover and line, they open up to an open space. And then we usually have connective tissue down here. Now, because of this, epithelial tissues have an apical surface and a basal surface. The apical surface is the one that faces the open space. Basal means base. There you go. Basal surface is the one that's on the basement membrane. Oops, excuse me, dropped my pen. You can do this instead and build up more cells. Make it a thicker tissue. But the definition of apical and basal stays the same. Now, this is apical, this is still basal. Epithelial tissues are classified by the number of cell layers and by cell shape. So at cell layers, we have 1, 2, 3. That would be stratified. Stratified is 2 or more layers of cells. Simple, then, is just 1. It's what I do the first time. We also have one called pseudo-stratified. Pseudo means false. It looks stratified, but actually it's simple. And I'll show you that on the next slide. And then by cell shape, well, we have squamous, which is kind of squished and flat. We have cuboidal, shaped like a cube, and columnar, shaped like a column. So put these together, and you get the epithelial tissues you're going to focus on today. We have simple squamous, 1 layer flat cells. Simple cuboidal, 1 layer square cells, square-ish. Simple columnar, 1 layer of column-shaped cells. For stratified, we're only going to do squamous. And there are 2 types, which we'll talk about in lab. One you're going to focus on this week, and one you're going to focus on next week. And then pseudo-stratified only comes with 1 cell shape, and that's columnar. So that's simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, stratified squamous, and pseudo-stratified columnar. 5 tissues that you're going to look at for epithelial. So here's simple, 1 layer. Here's stratified, multiple layers. And this is like a stratified cuboidal, which does exist, but we aren't going to look at it. We're going to talk about stratified squamous only. This is pseudo-stratified. Basically, every cell touches the basement membrane. You can see that down here. Every cell is touching this basement membrane, but not every cell reaches the apical surface. So when you look at it, it looks like you have one layer of cells, two layers of cells if you line up the nuclei. But you don't. You have one layer of cells. It's just that they don't all stretch up to the top. And then squamous, flat and irregular. They kind of have the shape of a raw egg, if you want to think of it that way. Cuboidal, roughly cube-shaped, a little more rounded, but cuboidal. They're about as tall as they are long. And then columnar are taller. So columnar, column-shaped. So those are the main tissues you're going to look at in lab.